The Black Hole Problem, Why Dune Feels Smaller Than Its Universe, How Narrative Over-Centralization Weakens Emotional Immersion in World Building. Section 1. Dune may be one of the most intellectually ambitious world-building franchises ever created, but its overwhelming dependence on a single thematic and material axis, spice, creates a kind of narrative black hole effect, where systems, politics, religion, destiny, and identity all collapse into one central abstraction. The result is a world that is conceptually rich, but emotionally under-diversified, admired more for its architecture than inhabited for its humanity. Section 2. This observation emerged from an unusual experience. Despite Dune's immense cultural prestige, I repeatedly failed to emotionally connect with it. I watched the modern films and retained almost no attachment to the characters, stakes, or world itself. Yet a YouTube explainer discussing spice, empire, and infrastructure suddenly made the universe feel far more compelling. That contrast revealed something important. The underlying operating system of Dune resonated more strongly than the dramatic presentation of Dune. That distinction sits at the center of this analysis. The core problem is not that Dune lacks depth, quite the opposite. The problem is gravitational imbalance. Everything in the universe bends toward spice. Politics revolves around spice. Religion revolves around spice. Interstellar travel revolves around spice. Longevity revolves around spice. Prophecy revolves around spice. Human evolution itself revolves around spice. The spice is doing too much heavy lifting. In economic terms, Dune resembles a civilization suffering from Dutch disease on a galactic scale. One resource becomes so dominant that it compresses diversification across the rest of the system. Frank Herbert intentionally modeled spice after oil, with Arrakis functioning as a science fiction analog for the Middle East. That metaphor is intelligent and politically sharp, but what works thematically does not always work emotionally. This is where the black hole story idea becomes useful. Section 3. Black holes compress everything inward. They overpower surrounding texture and reduce differentiation. Dune often creates that same emotional effect. The universe feels dominated by one giant civilizational dependency loop. The audience sees the machinery of the system more than the ordinary life occurring inside it. Compare this with The Matrix. The Matrix also contains enormous philosophical and metaphysical depth, including heavy biblical undertones involving awakening, sacrifice, destiny, resurrection, and liberation. But those ideas are metabolized through emotionally legible characters and grounded human experiences. Neo is not merely a symbolic operator. He feels confused, lonely, uncertain, exhausted, hopeful. The audience experiences the system through the emotional reality of the people trapped inside it. Dune often reverses this dynamic. The characters can feel like vessels carrying philosophical abstractions rather than deeply inhabited human beings. The audience understands Paul Atreides intellectually long before they emotionally inhabit his reality. The difference becomes even clearer when comparing the Avengers with Justice League. Avengers works because it distributes narrative vitality across multiple layers simultaneously. There are gods, billionaires, soldiers, scientists, spies, governments, civilians, friendships, rivalries, insecurities, and institutions like S.H.I.E.L.D. grounding the larger cosmic stakes. Even when the scale becomes apocalyptic, the audience always understands what is emotionally at risk. This content is brought to you by Bobby Giggs. Promote your brand here and reach a wide audience across platforms like YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Follow the links in the description to get started. Section 4. Justice League struggles because it suffers from abstraction overload. The mother boxes become vaguely omnipotent devices capable of resurrection, transformation, portal creation, planetary destruction, and biological reconstruction. The rules become unclear. The stakes become muddy. Atlantis is barely emotionally inhabited. Cyborg's transformation is underdeveloped. Superman, the emotional center of the franchise, returns too late into the story to properly re-anchor the narrative. Again, the audience sees the schematic more than the civilization. Dune suffers from a similar problem. Spice becomes so central that it suppresses environmental plurality. Great world-building stories usually distribute vitality across many independent dimensions: local cultures, ordinary routines, humor, relationships, food, rituals, conflicting ambitions, economic diversity, everyday survival. The world must feel inhabited rather than merely explained. Section 5. This does not mean Dune is unintelligent. In fact, part of its power comes precisely from its systems-level thinking. Frank Herbert understood leverage, dependency, ecology, monopoly infrastructure, and civilizational fragility extraordinarily well. Spice is not merely a drug. It is a metaphor for the invisible substrate every empire eventually depends upon. Grain for Rome, coal for Britain, oil for the modern industrial world. But there is a difference between creating a brilliant civilizational model and creating a fully metabolized emotional habitat. Section 6. One framework that helps clarify this distinction is derivative context distillation. The idea is simple. When a concept becomes emotionally or structurally unclear, temporarily rotate it into another familiar context to reveal hidden logic. Dune becomes easier to emotionally parse once translated into real-world systems. Spice becomes oil. The Spacing Guild becomes a logistics monopoly. Paul becomes a leverage operator. The Fremen become indigenous infrastructure custodians. The Bene Gesserit become mimetic bloodline engineers. Ironically, once rotated into those derivative contexts, Dune suddenly becomes more emotionally coherent. That itself reveals the central issue. The conceptual operating system is often stronger than the dramatic embodiment carrying it. Section 7. Conclusion. None of this means Dune is a failure. Its influence on science fiction is undeniable. Its systems thinking remains extraordinary. Its political and ecological foresight still feels modern decades later. But emotional resonance requires more than intellectual architecture. Great world building is not merely about coherent systems. It is about creating civilizations people emotionally inhabit rather than simply admire from a distance. That may ultimately be the black hole problem at the center of Dune. The universe is enormous, but the narrative gravity surrounding Spice becomes so overwhelming that much of the emotional and experiential diversity collapses inward. The result is a world that feels philosophically vast, yet strangely smaller than its own universe.